Welcome back to Jewish Mysticism Lessons in Tanya. We are doing chapter 20, or course or season number 4, which is titled Highest Consciousness. And it begins with chapter 20, which is Nondual Judaism. In the handout, we are the chapter 20 handout. And in the Tanya, in the practical Tanya by Rabbi Miller, we are on page 231. And up until today, the Tanya has begun to take us on a journey, which obviously we're not even halfway through. But the Tanya has begun to take us on a journey to what it means to love God and to have proper emotions for God, to love God, to have an awe for God, and to have a reverence for God, to have these same feelings that we have for people, to have them for God. And through those, or by inspiration of those, or driven by those, which is one of the most recent things that we introduced, to keep the Torah and the mitzvahs, right? So, in the words of the Zohar, I believe it was, they are called wings, right? Ava and Yira, or love and reverence, are called the wings for the mitzvot. So when we do a mitzvah, it needs wings to help it fly up above. And when we love God properly, or we fear God properly, we revere God properly, so then that channels that mitzvah, that drives that mitzvah to be in the right way. And Tanya's main focus has been, how can we say, Andrew, do you want to come sit right here? Sorry for moving you. I just want to let Jeff sit next to you. You brought someone with you, right?
My wife.
Right? I couldn't see who it was. Please, welcome. Come inside. Andrew, can you come sit right here? Like the tickets next to each other?
Oh, that was...
Jeff, what did you manage to do to yourself? Tell me the other guy looks worse.
I had rotator cuff surgery.
Oh, you had surgery?
Yeah.
Oh, no. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for coming and joining us. Remind me your name. We met before.
Lynn. Yeah, I can't drive.
Right? Thank you. So now you get to enjoy the class as well. Okay. All right. So, as we were saying, Tanya has promised to take us on a journey as to how these things can be, in the words of the verse from Devarim, right, from Deuteronomy, very, very close, right? So, for those of you that were here at the beginning, I know some of you are new. At the beginning of Tanya, we introduced a verse that said, Ki karov elecha hadavar me'od, which comes in succession to other verses where Moses tells the Jewish people, it is not over over the seas that you should say who's going to, the Torah and the mitzvahs, a relationship with God, or a proper and moral relationship with people, is not something that's over the seas that we have to hire somebody to take us over the seas. It's not in the heavens that we should hire somebody to take us to the heavens and figure out how we can, but rather the Torah tells us it is very, very close, right? Keeping a proper life, leading a proper life where we're connected to Hashem, where we are moral to those around us, etc., is a very, very close thing to do. And that is the journey that Tanya has promised to take us on from the beginning, to figure out how is it very, very close to you. Okay? So, without giving too lengthy of an overview as to what we've done until today, the most important and key parts, I think, are that in chapter 18, we introduced something called the hidden love, which is that every single person has within them a hidden or a covered over love, which is there as a spark, a love for Hashem. And in order for us, and it's natural, that's what I was looking for, it's natural, it's not just there, it's natural, and that's really who we are. We can connect to Hashem in a way of love and in a way of emotionally connecting with Hashem. It's there and it's natural, it's just that it's hidden. Of course, Hashem wants to give us the opportunity to connect with Him. And if we choose to tap into it, then we can get in touch with it. Right? The problem is that then in chapter 19, which was the last chapter we learned before today, we learned about how hard it is to awaken or to arouse that love into a proper emotion, into a full-fledged emotion that can actually drive action. Right? So let's hold that thought. We're going to elaborate upon this a little bit later, and that's where chapter 20 takes over. Chapter 20, 21, 22, one of the main things that we want to figure out here is, how is it that it's very, very close? If you told me it's very, very difficult and it's so hard, you have to be a Beinoni, you have to be a tzaddik in order to be able to arouse this love for Hashem, this love for God, then how is it very close to us? How is that something that's within reach? How is that something that's within our grasp? Okay? That's the main topic that we're going to discuss today. The way that Tanya is going to do it, it's going to take 1 or 2, maybe even 3 weeks for us to do it, is Tanya is going to challenge our understanding, or our lack thereof probably, of the first 2 commandments. Right? So we're all familiar with the fact when the Torah was given at Mount Sinai, and the 10 commandments were given. Right? So the 10 commandments were given. So just to, I watched the 10 Commandments once years ago, and there's another movie called Exodus, right? Or The Exodus.
No, maybe.
Different movie, right? But anyways, I don't remember exactly which details they get right and which details they don't get right. There's definitely a lot of creative license used. But my point is just to clarify what happened at Sinai according to the biblical narrative, right? According to the Torah. So the Torah tells us when the Jewish people came to Sinai, there was 3 days of preparation, and then they all gathered at the foot of the mountain. And again, I'm leaving out a lot of details because I want to get to a certain point. And then what happened is as follows. It says that the Jewish people were standing at the foot of the mountain. Moshe Rabbeinu climbed up to the mountain, and then the Jewish people heard. There was lots of drama. There was thunder and lightning, and the mountain was smoking. Okay.
They saw the voices.
Okay, right, and they saw what was heard, and they heard what was saw. But the point of the matter is that we want to get to is that they heard from the Almighty, and this is, a lot of people point to this as a logical proof that Judaism is real and is true. Meaning, if you want to approach it from a logical perspective and not from a faith perspective, that 600,000 people all claim at the same time, which is a very, very difficult feat to do. Try to get 600,000 people to even agree about what they want to eat for breakfast. Never mind about the fact that they saw godliness in the flesh. So 600,000 people saw godliness, and they heard Hashem speak to them. I don't know what that sounds like. Please don't ask me. But there was a godly revelation at Sinai. Okay. Now, how long did that godly revelation last? So Hashem said the first one of the 10 commandments. Anochi Hashem Elokecha, asher hotzeiticha me'eretz Mitzrayim. I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt, etc. And you should only believe in one God. As God was saying that, it was way too much of a revelation. The Jewish people's souls flew out of their body and they retired, not just for the night. And Moshe Rabbeinu had to beseech for the Jewish people. They can't handle it. So Hashem said, okay, and He revived them. It says that Hashem gave a spark, a little element of what's going to be when Mashiach comes, when Hashem will bring back the dead. And Hashem used a little bit of that dew, that special dew, and brought back the Jewish people. Okay, great. We're on to commandment number 2, right? So far, not off to such a great start. Commandment number 2. Okay, lo yiyeh lecha, which is the opposite of the first one, right? In other words, you shouldn't have any false deities, right? Again, the same thing happens. So Hashem brings them back to life, and Hashem was ready to keep going. Moshe was ready to keep going. The Jewish people said, we're done. We're done. One time this is going to work one way, and it's not going to work the other way. So we're done. So they said, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, you've been our messenger for many, many years. You have always been the go-to back and forth between the Jewish people and God. Why don't you tell us the rest of the 10 commandments? And so it happened. The rest of the 8 commandments. Right? Then Moshe Rabbeinu, right? So this is just a couple of key parts, because this might be some myth busting for some people. Bless you. This might be some myth busting for some people. So then the other 8 commandments, okay, but Moshe Rabbeinu said them, right? So this was like a speech. And then, following that, Moshe Rabbeinu tells the Jewish people, I am now going to ascend to the top of the mountain. He actually ascended to heaven and heard the rest of the Torah from Hashem himself. Hashem gave him the 2 tablets. So none of this business of Moshe Rabbeinu standing there with 2 tablets while, I think that's the way they portray it in the movies, right? He's standing there with 2 tablets while the voice is coming down. No. These were 2 separate parts. Okay? Then he went up, he got the tablets, he got the rest of the Torah, he came down with the tablets in his hands. Another famous shot, right? Came down with them in his hands. That's when he found them serving the golden calf. That's when he broke them. And that's when we get to later the second set of tablets. If you're not familiar with that part, that's fine. That's not as important to the conversation we're going to have today. The conversation we're going to have today is as follows. We would like to get to, okay, Tanya would like to introduce us to a concept which begins in Deuteronomy, begins in Devarim. You can see this in bullet point number 2. A concept called Ein Od Milvado. Okay, that's a verse from Deuteronomy, which means there is nothing other than Him.
Page 241.
231. We're about to start. Tanya wants to introduce us to this concept. What does it mean there's nothing else besides for Him? That's the title of today's lesson. Nondual Judaism. In other words, Tanya wants to introduce a concept which is very famous amongst all the Kabbalistic and chassidic philosophers, that it's not just when we say that the Lord, right, that Hashem is one, right? During Shema we say the Lord is one. We don't just mean that there is no other God. That would be a very simplistic view of that, and that's obviously also true, and that's obviously also an interpretation of Shema. But a deeper interpretation is that there is nothing else besides for God. In other words, that everything in this world is really godliness covered over, right? There are hidden sparks in everything, and we're going to elaborate upon this throughout. And this stems from, the source for this is a verse in Deuteronomy where it says, Ein Od Milvado. There is nothing else besides for Him. Not there is no other gods besides for Him. Not there are no other desires besides Him. Not that there are no other powers besides. There is nothing besides for Him. This is what Tanya wants to introduce us to. And Tanya starts this by challenging our understanding of the first 2 commandments. Why? Because the first 2 commandments are actually very, very central. I know we say the 10 commandments are very central to Judaism, right? But the first 2 are more central than anything else, which sort of gives a little bit of an explanation why the Talmud in Makot, which is the one that I was just relating about, the narrative as to how Sinai took place, and where it says that the first 2 commandments were spoken mipi hagvura, which means from God Himself. The first 2 commandments are very, very central to Judaism, and that might explain why we actually heard them from God Himself. What's so central about them? So for this we turn to the Zohar. The Zohar says that the first 2 commandments are actually a macro of all of the other commandments. Right? So, can anybody split the commandments for me into any sort of division? Very good. Do's and don'ts. Positive and negative. Very good. There's lots of other ways to divide them, but if you want to divide the commandments into just 2, right, there are 613 precepts of the Torah. There are 613 commandments that Hashem told us these are the rules to live by to lead a good and proper and moral life. And they're split up into 365 and 248. 248 positive, that should be the right side. 248 positive and 365 negative. Right? Do's and don'ts. You should do this. You should love your fellow as yourself, a very famous one. You should keep the Shabbos, another very famous one. You should keep kosher, honor your father and mother, very good. You should not steal, you should not rape, you should not kidnap, etc., all sorts of things, right? You should be honest in your dealings, you should not swindle. All these do's and don'ts that we have, right? And I tried to give a variety. I hope I did. Meaning, because they touch on lots of different things, right? They touch on our interactions between man and man, right? Or woman and woman. They touch on our interactions between man and God, right? In other words, we don't keep Shabbos in order to be a moral person between you and I. Shabbos, the truth is, that's actually not necessarily true. A lot of people say that a big part of Shabbos is shalom bayis, the peace that it brings into a home when a big part of Shabbos, especially Friday night and the lighting of the candles and having dinner, is bringing peace into the home, which actually is actions between man and man, in this case between man and his wife. Right, but so there's a variety of different commandments. They're split into 2. The positive and the negative, the do's and the don'ts. Says the Zohar, the first 2 commandments include within them all the rest of them. The first one, which is a positive one, which is believe in one God, right? That one includes all the positive, all of the do's in the Torah. Every single one, from keeping Shabbos to resting on the 7th year of Shemitah, right? Whatever it might be, the ones that are only in Israel, and then those the ones that are only in the Holy Temple, only when the Holy Temple stood, only when the Jewish people had their own government, whatever, all these different mitzvahs, right? Every single one of them, every positive one is included in the first one, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, that I am the Lord your God, right? And you shouldn't believe in any others. That includes in it. It's a macro, or it has in it a microcosm of each of the negative commandments, right? And when we have a little bit of this perspective, we're clearly not talking about a very simplistic view of just looking at the commandment as, oh, believe in God, don't believe in any sort of idol worship. Don't engage in any sort of idol worship, right? Clearly, we're looking at the commandment as a little bit of a deeper level. And that's how Tanya starts off, introducing us to this concept that the world is godliness, or the world is God. Okay? And just as a final question to point that out, I just want to point out that these two commandments are actually so important. And again, this begs the same question, like what is so important about it? We mention these commandments, we reaffirm our commitment to these two precepts, the first two precepts of the Torah, 3 times a day. Right? In the Shema, right? The Shema, the statement Shema, which is Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Or hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. Right? This statement, along with an elaboration of it, which we continue with, otherwise known as the reading of the Shema, is done 3 times a day. We do it once during the morning service, once during the afternoon service, once during the evening service, and then once before we retire in the evening. Right? 3 times a day we say it. And that's pretty intense. In other words, that's now I get it. Judaism is a monotheistic religion. We should be reaffirming it, right? But question: when's the last time anybody thought of saying that there might be 50 gods? Right? Now it might. You're right. It's something that we should have as part of the religion, and obviously it's a central part of the religion. But if that's the only thing we're doing here, then why do we have to reaffirm that 3 times a day? I would think we should reaffirm 3 times a day. Don't act in a not so moral manner, or don't conduct your business honestly. I feel like that's something people have challenges with much more often on a day-to-day basis. Is everybody with me?
Yes.
Okay. Now, before we get to the answers to this is going to be a 2-week journey. This is going to be a 2-week process. So I just want to give you the answer in a nutshell. Okay? In a nutshell, what the Tanya is going to introduce is that when we say that Hashem is one, we mean Hashem is one in the world. Not just that Hashem is one, that there's one God as in the godly realms. In other words, in the category of God, there's only one God and not more than one God, but rather in the world. And that is a constant journey that we have. So essentially, when we reaffirm that God is one in the world, what we're saying is my business dealings need to be honest. I cannot sleep with another man's wife. I cannot steal. I have to keep Shabbos. I have to honor my father and mother. It's all the different things, because otherwise, essentially, what I'm doing is the second one of the 10 Commandments. I'm denying the presence of God in this little iota of my life. Okay, that's in a nutshell. I know that might be a lot. Let's unpack it. Okay, let's see how Chassidus takes us to it. Okay, so let's start off with the sources for this concept, right? That it's not just that Hashem is one in the world. That Hashem is one as a God, and there's only one God and not 2 gods, or some sort of trinity, or anything along those lines. But rather, heaven forbid, but rather that Hashem is one in the world. So it's funny, Tanya makes sure to make it clear that there are so many sources of this that are not necessarily only chassidic. And we're in bullet point number 2, in other words, in section 2, in bullet point number 2, where it says sources, right? The first one is from the Medrash, otherwise known as Medrash Rabbah on Devarim, on the 5th book of the 5 books of Moses. And in the Tanya, we're on page 233. Okay? In the Medrash there, Hashem is called Yachid Umiyuchad, which means one and unified, or unique and unified. In other words, one and one. The one and only one is the best way that we can translate it in English. And that's directly from the Medrash on Devarim. In the High Holiday liturgy, one of my personal favorites that we sing is V'chol Maminim Shehu, which means, and all that believe that He. And then we end off the statement with a different praise to Hashem each time.
That's
right?
Yom Kippur, we say, right?
We say it on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It's part of the Musaf prayer, so we say it 3 times annually. We say it on Rosh Hashanah each day, and then on Yom Kippur. And basically what we're saying is, and to all those, we're really singing our own praises, and to all those who believe that He is all-knowing, and to all those who believe that He is omnipotent, and all those who believe that He lives forever. And one of the things that we say is, V'chol ma'aminim shehu levadohu. He is alone. He is the only one. And we say the same thing really in the morning liturgy. And this one is very, very powerful. I was going to get a siddur, but it's fine. He brings it down. We're still on page 233 here, right? The words are, we say, Atahu achelon nivra ha'olam, Atahu mishen nivra ha'olam. We say this every single morning as part of the preliminary services. You with me there, Jeff? Mm-hmm. Found it? We're almost towards the bottom of page 233. We say, as part of the morning services, the preliminary services right before it, we say, translation is, you were alone before the world was created, and you are alone since the world has been created. Already we see that it seems to be hinting at something else. It's not just talking about the fact that Hashem is the only God. What would it make a difference to Hashem whether the world was created or wasn't created, right? In other words, why would that change whether God is one? It's just it's a world. It's not another God. It's not like Hashem created another God, and then we say, but even though he created another God, he's the only God. No. Hashem created a world, and we feel the need to stress that he's still the only God. Anyway, and source number 4, which is from Malachi, which is one of the prophets.
The only substance is all. There is nothing.
Exactly. That's what Tanya wants to show us. And the 4th one is from Malachi, where it says, Ani Hashem lo shaniti. I am God, I have not changed. Which again is a strange statement to be saying. Fine, I get it. There's no other God. But why would I ever have thought that God would have changed? Right? And they all seem to be pointing in one direction, which is, and tell me if you see this in the different verses, which is the direction that Arit was pointing out, which we mentioned earlier, which is that it's not just that God is one in the heavens, or that God is one, the only God, but that there could be people. No. People, things, mountains, trees, all of these things that were created, in other words, the world that was created by God had no effect whatsoever on God. What does that mean? According to the Zohar, before God created the world, what was in existence? Just God. Just godliness. This is not just the Zohar. This is really this is Jewish belief. Before the world was created, God existed, and there's no before God existed, because God is unlimited. God is infinite. We're going to touch on that in a minute. That's a very strong statement. God is infinite. We'll get to it. Give me a moment. And what happened was that in order for God to create the world, this is a very you have to tread carefully when you say the statement. It says that God took some of his light, moved it aside, created a vacuum. I'm giving very physical and visual terms here, but it helps us understand it. And then he shined in a particular light that he created the world with. And then that was where the world was created, so to speak. And to a regular human being who was used to, okay, great, we needed to build a mikveh. We cleared out a space, right? Mikveh is the construction we have going on here in the corner. So we cleared out a space. We then brought in all the lumber, and then we created it. So now nothing else can be where the mikveh is. There can be a person inside the building, but where that building is, there can't be something else, because only one thing can be there, right? And that's the way we try to apply those rules to God. And that is the point that the Zohar and Chassidus and all of these statements throughout our liturgy and our, and the Medrash, etc., are coming to point out to us. That no, nothing changed from before God created the world to after God created the world. The change, or here's another way of looking at it: the changes that there were only from our perspective. In other words, God exists the same way he existed before he created the world, in exactly the same manner that he exists after he created the world. The only thing that changed is he allowed us the perception of existence, or the perception of the creation of the world. Right? And I know we're starting to go down a black hole here of, is our existence a reality? Is it all delusional? Whatever. It is. It's a reality. It's real. It's true. It exists. Let's leave that aside for a moment, because that we can really go down a rabbit hole here. And to climax all those sources that we were saying, the Zohar says, "Kula kamei kalo chashiv." That even after the worlds were created, right, the worlds which to us are so stressful and to us are so big and so vast, and so many people tried to conquer the whole world. Alexander the Great and Napoleon, these people were like, conquer the whole world, and they didn't even manage to conquer a small portion of it. Right? They didn't even know all of it existed. Some of them, but that whole world to God is literally as if it doesn't exist. Klo chashiv, as if it's meaningless to him. It's nothing. It's as if there's nothing there. The reason for that is because to Hashem, the world is just an expression of him. It's just more him. It's more godliness.
So his presence is 99.9, and we are the physical part.
No,
is very
his presence is 100.
Yeah, but
And the part that we see of ourselves there is meaning who are we? What are we? We are just extensions of God. We're just emanations of Hashem.
image of God.
Right, exactly.
If we image. It's like God looks in the mirror and sees us.
100%. But we have to be careful with that, because God looks in the mirror and sees us, but He doesn't see only us. He sees Himself the way He is. Now He doesn't see us. He doesn't see me in a white shirt and a burgundy tie and a.
Of what He is.
Correct. Okay.
We have delusion of materiality.
Right.
But this is the illusion.
Now, correct. But I'm avoiding specifically going down that question about whether life is an illusion or life is real. It's discussion for a different time. It was actually tackled. Pam, you were at that JLI course, right? I think they tackled that, right? Whether the world is real. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, in order to explain to us how little of a difference the world makes to God, in other words, how insignificant the creation of the world actually is to Hashem, the Tanya is going to give us an analogy. And the analogy, the point of the analogy is going to be to show us how if God created the world, then obviously the world means nothing to Him. Okay? And the analogy goes in steps. Let's start with step one. Step one is, think of one word. Okay? One word as it is contrasted or compared to the power of speech. I'm sure all of you have thought of this at one point. Right? Do we have a limited amount of words? Right? That one day we'll be like, I'm out. And the answer is no, obviously, right? I mean, it's yet to be proven otherwise. We have an unlimited amount of words in potential. Right? We do have an amount of words that we speak throughout our lives, but that's just a technical thing. That's how long we lived, and that's how many words we spoke. But we have the potential to speak as many as we can. Many people say that I'm going to speak many more words throughout my life than many other people will, because I speak much quicker. But the idea that there are really an infinite amount of words that can be spoken if you look at it from the perspective of the power of speech that we have within us. Right? We have the potential for speech. Let's not use the word power. Let's use the word potential. Right? The potential or the ability to speak words, and then there's an actual word. Right? So let's contrast that one word. Let's take a nice short word. Hi. Right? H-I. One little word. Very physical, very limited. It's not his, which would be H-I-S. It's not thigh, which would be T-H-I. No. It's just H-I. Hi. One word, it came out of your mouth, it took a certain amount of seconds to say it, there's a certain amount of energy to say it. That's the whole word. That's the beginning, that's the end, it's clearly only one word. And then you have the power of speech, or the potential of speech, which has really an unlimited amount of words. Right? And I want to open a small parenthetical here, just to give you an idea as to what infinite really means. I referenced it here in parentheses. Anybody ever hear of David Hilbert's Grand Hotel? Anybody? So David Hilbert was a German, not philosopher, a German mathematician who lived in the early 1900s, and in the 1920s at some point he introduced this concept, which till today has mathematicians, trying to. In other words, he wants to show us how little we really can understand about infinity. Okay, so I'm not going to go down his whole. It's a whole theory. I mean, not a theory. It's a long process. But the analogy that he gives is, imagine a hotel. He calls it the Grand Hotel. And the hotel has how many rooms? Anybody? An infinite amount of rooms. Okay, and the hotel, and there's a before the class I was researching it, so I googled it to get I've heard of it before, just to get the whole thing in my head, and a YouTube video came up where they said, and there's also in the lobby there's a very, very, very hard-working night clerk. Okay, And a night clerk is faced with an issue. His hotel, which has an infinite amount of rooms, is filled with an infinite amount of guests.
Mm-hmm.
So he's booked solid. And now somebody comes to the front desk and he would like a room. What's the answer?
Sure.
So he comes up with an idea. Well, one second, why sure? If he has an infinite amount of rooms, but the rooms are filled with an infinite amount of guests.
But it's infinite.
So he comes up with an idea. He says, I'm going to take, and by the way, you should know that when I learned this part of Tanya for the first time, I remember having this struggle in my head, which really goes to show how much this point is such an important point to wrap your brain around. Okay, let's keep going with the analogy, right? So he says, so this night clerk, let's call him Joe, comes up with a great idea. I'm going to take the guest from room number 1, right? Because it's an infinite amount of rooms, but there's a room 1, right? And I'm going to move him from room 1 to room 2. But what's the guest in room 2? I'm going to move from room 2 to room 3, and one from room 3 to room 4, and every single guest, an infinite amount of guests, are going to be moved from their room number to 1 plus 1. Okay? Now I have an empty room. Who was my guest? Great, you have a space. Now, David, what's his name again? David Hilbert comes up and he says, well, 1 second, let's take this a step further. What if a coach bus shows up and the coach bus has how many seats on it?
Infinite.
An infinite amount of seats. And on each one of those seats is an infinite amount of human beings, of guests that would like to stay at the hotel. So he can't move every guest an infinite amount of rooms forward. Right? So he comes up with a great idea. Every guest, I'm going to tell them to move from their room to their room doubled. Okay? Multiplied by 2. So if you're in room 1, you go to room 2. You're in room 2, you go to room 4. Room 4, room 8. Right? Room 3, room 6. Every single one of them. And now, all of the even-numbered rooms are full. Like when you double, it's automatically multiplied by 2, so that's an even number. All the even-numbered rooms, room 2, room 4, room 6, room 8, are all taken up. But an infinite amount of odd rooms are now available. And so he's going to take all of the infinite passengers from this bus. Anyways, without going down the full exercise to show us how it is, I think the key that can be taken away from this, the key realization about how little we know about infinity is as follows. We would like to think, and I talk now to my 15-year-old self who couldn't understand this. To me, always infinity was like, yeah, it's infinite, but it's infinite amount of ones. No, infinity is way beyond an infinite amount of ones. Infinity is not 1, 2, 3, and then at some point after a whole bunch of numbers goes infinity. No, infinity is a different type of existence. It's not a whole bunch of ones. 1 compared to 2 is half. 1 compared to 10 is a tenth. 1 compared to 100 is 1%. Right? 1 compared to 1,000,000 is 1 to the right 1 millionth. Right? 1 to infinity is not one particle of infinity. It's not. It's nothing. It doesn't exist. Does that make sense? It doesn't have any legitimacy when it comes to infinity, because there's no real way. Right? You found this hack. Okay, you move this guy from room 1 to room 2, but that's not really an answer. Right? If there's infinite,
It's not a real number.
Infinite is not just not a real number. It's not something that we, as finite human beings, can really wrap our brains around. Okay. Now try to contrast that one word against an infinite amount of words, against the power of speech. Does the fact that one word came out of your potential for speech make any difference to your potential of speech? Is it now infinite minus 1? Is that what it is now? No, infinite can't be infinite minus 1. That doesn't work. Right? That's why it's so ridiculous to move the guests up 1 and say, oh, all the rooms, the infinite rooms are filled by infinite guests besides for 1. That doesn't work. If you're infinite, you're infinite. Right? Everybody with me in this? It's a great exercise. But let's make it real, let's make it practical now, right? So all of this was one word as contrasted or as compared to an infinite amount of words, in other words, the power of speech. Now, the power of speech is, out of the 3 functions that we have, that we interact with the world with, everybody remember them? Thought, speech, and action. Right? Speech is from the more external ones. Thought is even less of an existence, right? Or even less physical or material than speech is. So now compare, we'll skip a couple steps, okay? Now compare one spoken word to the potential for thought, right? Again, remember, we have a potential for thought inside our brains, which is that we can think an infinite amount of thoughts. So compare not one thought, one spoken word, how little does it really, it clearly doesn't exist in any of it. And now, take it even one step further, which is, what's the source of your thought process? The source of your thought process is really your soul. Your soul has lots of different functions, right? There's chachma, bina, dat, there's 10 attributes to the soul, etc., right? Different ways that and thought is only one of them. So the soul has infinite amount of potential ways of interacting with the world or whatever it is, right? And now compare that one spoken word to them. That comparison, clearly, I mean, it got a little redundant really for no reason. And that comparison, this thought exercise, which shows us that it's not like it's one, like one with a bajillion, gazillion, whatever number, as a 5-year-old you would have said, for how many shooting stars you saw, right? It's not one of that, which would mean, okay, you're very, very far, but you're one closer. You're not any closer to infinite if you have one. In that vein, the world was created through the speech of Hashem, right? Again, these are very physical terms that we use so that we can understand them. But the world was created by Hashem speaking. That's what it says right in the beginning of the book of Genesis. It says, in the beginning, Hashem spoke. Hashem created the heaven and the earth. It says, "Vayomer Elokim Yehi," whatever it is. Let there be light, or let there spread forth grass or trees, whatever. Right? And it did. It happened through speech. And speech, obviously, by God, speech is not like we imagine speech, but speech by God is obviously more external and less godly, for lack of a better word, than his thought process. And now compare the fact that we are just a little utterance that Hashem said compared to the infinite amount of being which Hashem is. Okay? Try that out for size. Right? And the Alter Rebbe says, let's take this even one step further. Alter Rebbe says, try to take an emotion. And an emotion, as it is, right? So you have a love, an actual love, right? And maybe you have words that are spoken out of love, and you have a feeling and a throbbing heart, and all these things are part of love, right? Before love, and we spoke about this a lot because we analyzed emotions and how they come to be. Before you can have a love, you have to know about the thing or the person that you're loving, right? Or Hashem that you love. So whatever, and then sometimes you can have even before, right? So you can have a love for something that isn't an actual love. It's not a fleshed out love. It's just in your head. You've thought a lot about it, but it hasn't actually reached an emotional state of love yet. Okay? Now taking one step before that. And by way of example, I'll just give some foods, right? Before, everybody in this room looks like very sophisticated connoisseurs. But before you were a sophisticated connoisseur, you might not have understood that much about wine. And a person might not understand much about caviar or some other delicacy that you've never had. But you've heard that it's very, very good, and there's potential there to develop a love for that. Follow what I'm saying? So it's not a love, it's still the thought about the thing which will then develop into a love. It's not a development thing, it's just the knowledge of the fact that there exists a thing which I can then come to love by meditating on it and thinking about it enough, and then that love will be expressed. Right? With me? How much does the love mean to that potential state before it is? And we're gonna cut the lesson short here, but I just want to take a moment to think about how that applies to Hashem. Right? We, as we are to Hashem, we're starting to understand a little bit more about why we would say every morning in the liturgy, Atahu, what were the words on page 233? You were alone before the world was created, you are alone since the world has been created. Nothing really changed. The fact that the world was created didn't make any difference in Hashem. We still have absolutely no clue how this connects to loving Hashem being an easy thing to do, or keeping the Torah and the mitzvahs, or leading a moral life being an easy thing to do. We still, right?
No.
We're not holding it yet. But this is part one of a two-part process called Non-Dual Judaism. In fact, next week's lesson is going to be called Non-Dual Judaism number 2. So with this, we'll bring to a close Jewish Mysticism Lessons in Tanya, chapter 20, or lesson 1 of Highest Consciousness, which was titled Non-Dual Judaism. And I hope you'll all join us next week for Non-Dual Judaism part 2.